and record this meeting so that you have access to it after the session is complete. My name is Rachel Nichols. I work at Unizin, and I'll be your host for today. I'll monitor the chat for any questions that come in. And with that, I'll pass it off to Nina, who'll be leading the presentation and works at Top Hat.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rachel. And thank you all for making time to be here today. Looks like we've got a small but hopefully engaged group. So feel free to come off mute at any point. We can make this a lively discussion. I love being interrupted, so please join me. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Nina Villamoria Angelo. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing and Strategy at Top Hat, one of Unizin's partners. I'm based here in Toronto, where homeschool has gotten quite loud and lively. So if you hear 7-year-olds counting very loudly in the background, you'll know that's my daughter. I've been in ed tech for about 10 years now. In my current role, I support institutional leaders and faculty like yourselves in leveraging Top Hat as you respond to the rapidly changing and evolving expectations of today's students, which has been quite the whirlwind over the last year. So why don't we just dive in? And again, please come off mute at any point. Looking forward to having a dialogue. We'll start off with what's kind of, statement of the obvious. I don't think there's been a year that has given us so much cause for reflection as the one we've just endured. It's been grueling and often anxiety inducing, but at the same time, it's also been incredibly inspiring to see how all of you, how institutions have adapted to the changes that COVID's brought about. And in many respects, it's been a really remarkable period, not just in terms of the resilience of higher education, but also in the pace of innovation and the openness to change demonstrated by faculty and institutions. As you can imagine, at Top Hat, we're, of course, ardent students of the industry. We've been carefully tracking the pandemic journey through actually a series of faculty and student surveys since March of 2020. And today, I'd like to share some of those insights with all of you and how they've informed a new framework we've created to guide the thinking around the future of higher education. I know that's a conversation that many of you are having in your departments, in your schools, and at your institutions. Near and dear to our hearts, and I'm sure all of you attending today, this framework, it really emphasizes elevating access and quality of the learning experience to ensure that students are getting the benefits of a college education. And I'm going to try to help make this framework really tangible and actionable with some stories that demonstrate the power of addressing students' needs in a post-pandemic world. My colleague Eric Gardner is joining us today as well. And in the name of engagement as best we can over Zoom, Eric, as well as another colleague, Diana Lai Reed, will be posing questions in the chat so that you can all engage in a dialogue on the topics as we're discussing. As best we can over Zoom, we'll do this. But as I said, also feel free to just come off mute and interrupt me. Now, the spring of 2020 was, of course, a massive shock to the system. Those first few months, which are, kind of a distant memory, but also a real blur. At the time, I think we were all reeling and trying to really figure out the way forward, especially when it became clear that the pandemic would be a marathon rather than a sprint. When we surveyed more than 800 faculty, instructional support staff, administrators in the lead up to fall 2020, they were just coming up for air after the sudden switch to emergency remote teaching. And the concern around keeping students engaged and motivated while learning remotely was almost palpable. And our data certainly supports this. Yet, despite the challenges of the spring, the priority was to keep moving forward. Faculty and staff spent summer months immersing yourselves and your colleagues' selves in ed tech solutions and embracing pedagogies like active learning and student-centered design. In fact, roughly 60% of respondents spent 40 hours or more learning the new tools of the trade to improve on the shortcomings of the spring semester. And I think this is an incredible testament to the passion and conviction so many of you have toward your craft, and creating those learning experiences that make really a meaningful difference to students. And while far from perfect, those efforts have definitely paid off, right? Our most recent survey, which concluded just a few weeks ago, polled more than 3,000 undergraduate students. And what we found is that there's a growing number that are seeing their instructors taking steps to improving the learning experience. Instructors are making learning more engaging, more active. They're promoting discussion and interaction, and they're really getting students to apply their learning. This isn't easy to do even in the best of times, let alone when you're teaching remotely during a pandemic. Perhaps a little bit unsurprisingly, students who agree their instructors make an effort to build community, to get them working together, who challenge them to apply what they're learning in the classroom, are much more likely to say that they're engaged in courses and to be more motivated outside of class than the average student. The impact is really pretty striking and speaks volumes about how much faculty and institutional leadership have invested in adapting to these new teaching modalities. So the challenge then is actually one of consistency. While almost 40% of students have seen an improvement in the learning experience to the fall 2020 term, 30% say there had been no change, and 25% actually feel like things got a bit worse. So for too many students, it seems like the winter term has not met their expectations, with only 19% saying the learning experience has been worth the cost of tuition. So we could easily chalk this up to an unprecedented set of circumstances, and there's certainly some truth to that. Most students would clearly prefer to be back in the classroom and enjoying everything that a campus experience has to offer. But in many ways, I think the pandemic has exposed these fundamental challenges within higher ed to provide more accessible, more engaging, more valuable learning experiences for students. And we don't think that these challenges will disappear once students return to the physical classroom. I'd say, historically, campus experiences have played a really major role in an institution's ability to attract and retain students. And this is still really important for a lot of them. But the pandemic has also shown a light on what happens inside the quote unquote classroom. The discrepancy between investment in and value out isn't something that we should dismiss as sort of predictable or temporary in terms of the fallout of this kind of extraordinary year. I think if we do that, we'd be ignoring the growing concerns we're hearing from many different corners about the return on investment of a college education. The issues, I think, are really familiar to all of us, right? And we've been talking about them for a while. Tuition costs have grown dramatically along with student debt. Job prospects are increasingly uncertain. Corporate America is clamoring for more kind of job-ready skills rather than just degrees. And lower cost certification and alternative credential programs, accreditation programs are providing those students that would have been traditional higher ed students with new alternatives. And maybe this is exacerbated by the pandemic learning experience, but a recent report from the Carnegie Corporation of New York and Gallup found that nearly half of parents today want other options besides a four-year college education for their children. So the choices for would-be students at your institutions are abounding. New players are eager to meet the desire for alternatives, ideally low-cost alternatives, with what some are referring to as kind of the era of eduployment, right? The thinking is instead of investing in an expensive education, only to assume the risk of having to find your job later, the whole process is sort of integrated, right? Students identify a trade or a career, get the necessary training, and then either receive the support in finding employment or get that guarantee of an actual job. Now, on one end of the spectrum, you start working and employers like Google or Shopify or Amazon pay for your degree or to enroll in an MBA program, providing you commit your loyalty to the company. I'd say at the other end of the spectrum, we find micro-credentialing, where students just get enough learning to develop the skills they need for a particular niche, right? And it's early days, but what remains to be seen is kind of the long-term impact on earning potential this different alternative approach has relative to the traditional college degree that many institutions provide today. So the risk of this course for the would-be students end up missing the broader value of a university education. The opportunity to really gain exposure, right, to different disciplines in pursuit of your major, the opportunity to be part of a learning community within which you can really explore and grapple with concepts, the opportunity to experiment and work outside your comfort zone, and of course, exposure to faculty who bring really deep expertise and the latest research on their disciplines. So, we sitting back and watching this happen, we feel like these are pretty significant headwinds. But at the same time, we know that throughout its nearly 400-year history, the higher education systems have demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt. And the task is now in front of us to respond to these evolving needs and expectations of students and really focus on what's happening inside of a course, which is really the building block of an undergrad experience. In many respects, higher ed finds itself at an inflection point. Among the many issues educational leaders are grappling with, we believe the core learning experience should be the priority. And maybe this is something that you're grappling with in your institutions, kind of how do we think about the previous focus on campus experience and life versus the core teaching and learning experience. According to one of the largest longitudinal studies of graduates in US history, it's the quality and the relevance of the learning experience that has the biggest bearing on success and well-being in life. And it's here that higher ed can really build on experience faculty have gained using technology over the last year. And we think it's pretty good reason for optimism. We see many indications that students are looking to apply the lessons they've learned during the pandemic to emerge stronger and more relevant to ensure a college degree remains synonymous with, opportunity, prosperity, and success. Faculty identify student engagement as a top priority, and institutions are really recognizing the powerful role that engaging learning experiences can have on driving student outcomes. It's really kind of no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. The learning experience has always been central to the value of a college education, but in many ways, it's taken on even greater significance. Now, campus experience is still important, but our survey results suggest that the learning experience and the role of faculty seem to hold even greater importance to students in terms of realizing the value of their higher ed investment. Building a learning community, providing mentorship, timely, helpful feedback to spur that academic curiosity and success have become increasingly important in meeting the needs of expectations of students. So, how do we begin putting this together in a way that makes college more accessible, to foster a greater sense of belonging, to create these learning experiences that motivate students to persist in their academic journey? So, like probably many of you, we've been giving this a good deal of thought in collaboration with a number of institutional leaders, including our friends at Penn State, a Unizin school, and digging into our survey data, we've developed a framework to provide guidance on creating the right conditions for students to receive and perceive meaningful value from their learning experiences. At the center, we believe institutions must focus on meeting a fundamental set of needs to help more students thrive. So Many of you might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Similarly, in this sort of model that we've developed, each need must be satisfied, for example, access and belonging, before higher needs like student engagement and perceptions of value can be realized. In applying this framework, institutional collaboration and support are essential, but we think it's faculty who must play the vital role of being those agents of change in the classroom. So let me dig in a little further into what we call the hierarchy of student needs. As I do, feel free to reflect and even share in the chat how your department, your school, your institution is addressing needs at each level of the hierarchy, where you might have best practices to share, and where there are challenges and opportunities for improvement. And hopefully at the end, we can leave time to have a good dialogue about that. I'll also preface by saying that what we're about to go through is nothing new. If anything, we've had discussion upon discussion over the last year as an industry about where the drawbacks are and where the gaps are. What we're hearing, though, is that the framework is really helpful in making kind of the next steps more concrete for institutions as you make your strategic choices around pedagogy, around content, and around technology. Okay, so let's dig in. At the most basic level, we have access and ensuring a level playing field for all students by making learning inclusive, equitable, flexible, accessible. And we know that this has been a hot topic over the last year because the pandemic has really laid bare the gaps in this particular level. It's about eliminating barriers like affordability or time, or even geography, right? And also the frictions posed by technology and inequity in general, which we'll touch on in more detail. Thankfully, with all the recent investments into enabling EdTech resources, institutions are really in a much better position to offer a broad range of options to improve access to education. So this is, blended, high flex, online, asynchronous learning, really critical that many of today's students would, critically important given that many of today's students are working part-time, are working full-time, have family responsibilities on top of attending to their education. But it can also mean adopting affordable course materials, right? Digital content, say, than costly printed textbooks, for example. And the key here is not having to sacrifice on quality and finding ways to really find and improve the value derived from course materials, from experiences, while lowering the costs for students. We can talk more about this in a minute, I think. And I think it's important to state that we won't really move the needle on value if learning experiences stay inflexible or inaccessible to today's students. So that's kind of the base foundational level of the hierarchy, the right to play for all students, essentially. Next, we have belonging. So at the belonging level, the opportunity is to really empower students with tools, skills, confidence they need to find a sense of community, and maybe even have the confidence to go outside of their comfort zone in finding that community, receiving mentorship, creating meaningful connections with faculty and peers. We know this is especially important in large introductory courses where students new to college are maybe new to their major at that point and are kind of at their most vulnerable, and when their success is kind of least a sure thing. Institutions like yours can and probably already have begun to invest in tools that really nurture these types of connections and interactions within the course experience. Our research shows that when institutions can take concrete steps to foster community, both through programs and technology, students have a much more favorable perception of their college or university. They're also more motivated inside and outside the classroom and more likely to perceive that the quality of the learning experience is better than average. So belonging and connection are really the foundation students need to be able to engage in learning, to feel comfortable enough to take the risks, to experiment and move outside their comfort zone. This is what we think substantive learning is really all about. But this is really challenging if students don't have kind of that sense of fellowship. So the engagement level, which is the next one above belonging, is about motivating students to kind of lean in to their education. When students interact with educators who make learning active, engaging, who foster that sense of community, that encourages exploration, encourages risk-taking, they're more motivated to learn. There's a ton of research that shows motivation drives better outcomes, not just in terms of grades and graduation rates, but really in enabling students to apply learning in ways that are valuable to them as individuals. Active learning, as I said earlier, is no longer a nice to have. It's strongly correlated with the perception of student value and really should be understood at a fundamental, elemental level of fostering that motivation to learn. And then at the very top of our framework, we have value. I'd say historically, many students, many educators, institutions have measured value and outcomes based on completion rates, letter grades. You all are familiar with this. I think what we're advocating for, and what I know many of you are exploring and grappling with in your teams, is an expanded view of value that may include student perceptions of quality of the learning experience, both in the moment as they're learning and over time. Our perspective on this is big data is already transforming many aspects of our lives, and higher ed is no different, but we actually believe educators need access to what we call small data, actionable insights served up in real time that are like signals they can use to assess progress at a class level and individual level and really create those feedback loops to support student learning. So for example, interactive reading assignments allow students to self-assess as they go while they're absorbing new material. In-class quizzes, polls, participation in discussions can provide that steady stream of additional insights to faculty and to students themselves. And this is what really creates that feedback loop. That's what actually can create coaching and mentorship opportunities that can be really transformative to the student experience. And by combining what we're calling small data with those coaching opportunities, we can create more moments of insight that get students reflecting on their learning journey and kind of becoming more in tune with their strengths and how they can be applied in the world outside of school. And ultimately, technology, we believe, can enable educators to connect meaningfully with students at scale or on that individual basis. So like I said earlier, the concepts themselves are really well trodden, right? But a framework really allows institutions to have those honest conversations about how you're performing at every level of the hierarchy of student needs. Sitting down with your team and saying, where are we, where do we want to be on every level of the hierarchy? Where are we today? And let's figure out how we chart that actionable path to get there. So we've published this framework along with additional insights and perspectives into a document that we've titled The New Higher Ed Value Equation. And so through the Unizin Summit, this is available for you at the Top Hat virtual booth. So feel free to make sure you grab your copy. What I'd like to spend a little bit of time doing, and then I'd love to open the floor to discussion, is to provide a couple examples to really bring to life how the framework works in action, in helping institutions, helping faculty to really move the needle on student value. So I'll go through that and then look forward to your questions in a dialogue to be able to share best practices. So in higher ed, access, as I said, has usually centered around admissions policies, financial aid, affordability. But we think that we can also think about access through the lens of the classroom itself and providing the flexibility students need to be successful. So part of this has to do with eliminating the frictions that many students are experiencing just getting started on their college education. There's really an opportunity cost here that students have to bear when equity and access are not an automatic, whether they're dealing with the bursar for an extension or navigating alternative financial options or accessing the technology and resources that they're supposed to rely on for their learning. A surprising number of students have actually struggled with this piece about technology, and maybe we've read about it over the last year. We know that roughly 80% of faculty have employed tools beyond their LMS in order to teach effectively. And that's admirable, but this lack of standardization has created unnecessary obstacles for many learners. So the question is, how do we address that? We know that the remote learning journey has not been popular with many students, and it's unsurprising that 54% of survey respondents said that when campuses are able to safely reopen, they would prefer to primarily learn in person. But when we consider access, what's interesting is that almost half of students want to retain at least some element of online learning in their education, given the inherent flexibility that online learning affords. Same with faculty, right? Faculty are also, while it's been tough to be able to teach in a remote learning environment, remote teaching environment, maybe understatement of the year, there is the benefit of some flexibility that the online modality has created. Students clearly see value of having the option to attend classes in person or virtually, synchronously, asynchronously, being able to access learning materials digitally. The flexibility of online learning, particularly asynchronous learning options, opens up a ton of opportunities for both traditional and non-traditional students to participate in the higher ed experience. But in providing the greater emphasis on asynchronous learning options, we have to also think about the collaboration tools to ensure that students feel a sense of connection and don't lose that connection. Our winter 2021 student survey also told us that more than half of students think it's important or very important to work with interactive textbooks that allow them to read and assess learning as they go. Why? Well, the first reason is cost. 60% of students said the cost of traditional textbooks was challenging, compared to 40% of students who said the same thing about digital interactive textbooks. And when we asked how effective their textbooks were at supporting their learning, 57% of students said traditional textbooks were effective versus 71% who said the same of interactive digital textbooks. We also know institutions have started to pursue what you'd call an equitable access model, right? Where institutions foot the bill for course materials and make it a flat cost to students. That way, no one is making a decision about whether to go pre-med, right, based on the cost of the expensive anatomy and physiology textbooks. Kudos to UC Davis and many other schools who are starting to pursue this model in earnest. The focus on access and leveling the playing field goes far beyond just tuition affordability and simply being able to get in the door. That's why it's the foundation of the hierarchy. Brown University offers a really compelling example of helping to level the playing field. Before the January 2019 semester, Brown made the decision to provide students with access to active learning tools free of charge. This would allow instructors to incorporate active learning in and outside of the class at no cost for their student. This is not possible at every institution. We understand the budget constraints and the challenges of line items in the budget, but still laudable nonetheless. There were other benefits as well. Because the platform allowed faculty to create their own content, including interactive reading and homework assignments, in many cases, instructors were able to eliminate the costs of printed materials for students altogether. Standardizing on one system has the added value of removing friction, right? That I described earlier around technology, since students are more likely to use kind of the same set of tools from class to class. So this is just one example of how institutions are leveling the playing field and ensuring more students are enabled and empowered for success. Okay, so if we could provide only one takeaway from all the insights we've gathered this year through our research, it would be to focus on creating community and creating belonging. As we plan for a return to campus and some hopefully, sense of normalcy. I think it's important to stress that when it comes to fostering belonging, the on-campus experience cannot be a college's only calling card. It's really quite remarkable to see the halo effect that community has on the student experience. Students who agree their professors create a sense of community and belonging inside the classroom are more likely to say they would recommend their institution, to be engaged and motivated in their studies, and to see the overall value of their higher ed investment than the average. So it's not surprising that even when students return to the classroom, 2/3 say it's important or very important to have access to messaging tools, collaboration apps to help them stay connected to their peers and their faculty. It's because of the human connection, right? With peers, in particular with faculty. Education, as you all know, is a highly human experience, right? And this is what makes the difference for students. So let me bring this to life for you. So this is Sarah Sletton. She's an associate professor of biomedical sciences at the University of North Dakota. And she's a really great example of what's possible when the right technology finds its way into the hands of a very talented educator. Sarah had been using an all-in-one courseware solution for a number of years. So when COVID hit, it put an end to in-person instruction for her university. She switched to actually using an asynchronous approach. And while it worked well enough, she and her students really struggled with that sense of isolation and being cut off from one another, which I know we've all felt over the last year. So when fall came around, fall 2020, she began employing a hybrid approach. So now Sarah hosts online discussions and includes self-paced learning components. She records lectures with students review before class, along with an online quiz to assess comprehension of the material. And then she holds virtual classes 3 times a week where she and her students can work together synchronously on case studies. I think it's that combination of self-led study, communal learning, actually in the classroom at the same time, albeit virtually, has led to some of the highest student evaluations in her department. In rating the quality of the education they perceived, Sletton received an overall average of 4.64 out of 5, and her scores for learning and engagement were also best in class. A really great example of community and connection clearly playing in an important role. But so has her focus on creating learning experiences that engage students. And like community, like belonging, learning that is active, that gets students applying what they've learned can have a powerful halo effect. Students who agree that their instructors make regular use of hands-on learning are much more likely to say they would recommend their institutions, to be engaged and motivated, and really see the value of their higher ed investment. In our analysis, we also saw similar effects among students whose instructors promote discussion and interaction in their classes. These are, of course, also hallmarks of truly well-implemented active learning. And so it's becoming clearer and clearer that active learning isn't just this fad, it's not a frill, but it's really just a must-have that will differentiate leaders in higher ed from those that remain content with the status quo. We've also learned that when it's safe to return to on-campus learning, more than half of students say it's important or very important for educators to continue incorporating in-class engagement like live chat, discussion, polling tools into their course design. Institutions and faculty really have the opportunity to work together here. And hopefully, on this call, we've got a mix from both of those groups to really extend the benefits of active learning beyond the classroom. This means, easier access to digital courseware, providing those interactive digital textbooks, not just flat ebooks, that allow students to engage in different types of content, video, text, interactives, to assess their learning and really receive feedback as they go. So this is Kirsten Grant, a professor in the Department of Chemistry at CUNY. She's a bit of a poster child when it comes to student engagement. She teaches chemistry to a large cohort of pre-nursing students, and her course in a single semester caps out at something like 650 students, really large class size. And most of these students are primarily concerned with getting good grades in order to qualify for the NCLEX. And in her experience, this has meant students tend to focus on cramming for high stakes exams rather than actually learning the material. So Kirsten began integrating assessments and collaborative activities into her in-class presentations. She also wrote her own interactive digital textbook that includes multimodal pre-class assignments. And because it's digital, she's able to get immediate insights into how students are progressing through the material. It's those signals and that ongoing feedback loop that allows Kirsten to be able to excel as an instructor. So her class is designed so that by the time students arrive in class, they've prepared to move on to more difficult concepts, kind of the classic, flipped classroom model. And after class, students complete a homework assignment with tracked problems, so she can check in on how students have comprehended the material and reach out to struggling students or adjust any follow-up lecture material based on that. And since making these changes, she's noticed a pretty significant increase in student test scores and a 95% approval rating on how she's leveraging interactive content and in-class engagement tools to really structure her course and help her students learn effectively. So students clearly saw value in the changes that Grant made to her course, and I think part of her success has to do with really harnessing the data, as we said, the insights that the digital learning tools were kind of throwing off to her as an instructor. Great teaching, as you all know, is a process of give and take, and it's based on empathy, connection, the use of qualitative and quantitative signals and insights that allow you to be able to support students effectively. Data is really the foundation to improve academic outcomes and to help students gain perspective on the value of what they're learning in the moment and over time. Part of the power here, as we've said, is these feedback loops. And I know there's a huge focus in academia right now on figuring out how to make these feedback loops more effective, both for students and instructors, so that students feel like they're not only listened to, but they're actually understood and supported personally. I don't think it'll surprise anyone, but like community and creating engaging learning experiences, timely, relevant feedback is a powerful motivator for students. Compared to the average, students who feel their instructors do a good job of this tend to have more favorable views of their institution and the quality of the learning experience, amongst many other variables. Access to small data allows instructors to create that feedback loop, insights kind of served up in real time through digital learning tools. We can address three important aspects of the learning experience. First, performance, right? We know that by, assigning small stakes assessments, faculty can get insight on a regular basis, how students are progressing, first day of class onwards, not having to wait for signals from the midterm or the final exam, and being able to kind of get those early alerts. But equally important is signals about engagement. How engaged are students in the learning process? Are they participating in class? Are they interacting with the assigned readings? Interactive homework assignments, in-class polls, for example. All of these provide educators with that steady stream of insights about whether and how material is really resonating with students. And we know that research says that engagement is such a great leading indicator. Okay, so we talked about performance and engagement, and we've been talking about that for a while in education. I think the key piece here is really the perception of value on behalf of the student, right? In order to deliver an effective educational experience, faculty need to be thinking about that perception of value. Institutions need to be thinking about that perception of value. Leveraging tools to gauge student satisfaction throughout the course. That allows educators to track that perception and use these insights to be able to tailor their course more effectively. So I'll use an example from another Unizin school. Damian Hommel offers a compelling example here. He is a senior instructor of geography at Oregon State. And his mission is to help students understand how every facet of their lives, economic, societal, cultural, is intertwined with the environment and the world around them. So Damian uses a student response system and interactive textbook capabilities to improve student engagement and track their interest and progress with readings outside of class. He's actually using Top Hat to be able to enable this. He serves up questions during lectures to help students recall facts, concepts, and check their comprehension with higher order questions. His lectures and readings are really packed with rich multimedia content that makes students sit up a little bit in their seats, right? And interact with the subject matter. And all of these activities are generating data for Damian, providing him real-time insights that allowed him to see if students are engaged or comprehending the material as he expected. And if not, he can quickly adjust his approach. He's a man who likes to wear sneakers in the classroom. He's always jumping around. So physically and actually pedagogically, he's always thinking about how to pivot and how to address the needs of students. This visualization of student data in real time has had a really profound impact, enabling him to teach in a really agile way and determine where he focuses his energies. And students clearly see value. Enrollment in all his courses is up despite the pandemic. His classes are full. There's apparently a wait list. And according to an anonymous survey he recently ran, 92% of students said that he has integrated technology into his class in a way that's really improved engagement. And 90% said it was effective at making them feel part of a wider learning community. So these and many others are the stories that really inspire us at Top Hat. They show us how even small changes can have enormous positive effects. As the pandemic has demonstrated, educators like these and higher education as a whole have had a remarkable capacity to rise to the occasion. Combining pedagogy, technology, the power of faculty, institutions can really make learning more accessible and ensure every course, regardless of how it's taught, becomes a place of relevance, of belonging, of vitality. So we hope you find this framework useful as you and your teams are thinking about evolving the learning experience for students in a post-pandemic world. We've been hosting some pretty lively workshops with institutions that we kind of personalize using the framework to help you address gaps, think through how to take meaningful steps to address the issues that I've touched on today. These workshops are complimentary. Our team at Top Hat is happy to chat with you about them. You can chat with our team at the virtual booth. They'd be happy to tell you more about how we can help you personalize these insights from the hierarchy to your specific institution. So I'll pause there. Thank you for listening. We've got a few minutes. Eric, any questions that you think we should tee up from the lively chat?
I'm just gonna just getting off mute and starting my video. Sorry, I've been just focused on the presentation. Love to open the maybe go to Diana to see if anything bubbled up that that she'd want to surface with our attendees.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button there for a second. But so one of the questions that I've thrown in the chat really was around, trying to get a sense of what big thorny issues, your institutions are sort of dealing with respect to the hierarchy. Would love to get a sense of, what you're seeing on the ground, what sorts of conversations are you having, and whether that's kind of really impacted how you are planning ahead for the fall.
Anyone care to bravely come off mute and address Diana's question? Perhaps we can get some best practice sharing as well as maybe some commiseration.
This is Frank. I'm a professor at Indiana Wesleyan University in central Indiana. And I just like to say that, I'm here today because we're looking for every way to help our students understand the value of their investment. Everybody is hearing all the rhetoric of mistrust, of the value of the investment in higher education. So there's a lot of conversation about that. Sometimes I wonder if it's not a lot of racket. I do think that that we have to pay attention to the conversations because everybody's level of upskilling may be progressively different. So we're going to need those guided pathways where if a person wants to only come in for micro-credential, that's fine. But clearly there's lots of evidence still suggesting that the value of a comprehensive higher education at the associate or the bachelor's level is still a valuable investment over the span of your lifetime in terms of quality of life, access to satisfying employment, and opportunity to make more money as well. So I'm here because we're looking for any and every way to pack our value proposition to our student and help inform our students, hey, this is why it's important. It's even more valuable than an investment in a home, the only other comparable investment you might make at that level. But even at that, it does more than that. And here's why. So we're not fixed mindset as it relates to disaggregating our curriculum and addressing the needs for micro-credentialing. No, we're not going to get left behind there. But at the same time, we still believe in the idea and the essential idea. A lot of times it's just educating the parents and the students about the value of doing that, despite those small cases of those entrepreneurial teenagers who make $1 bazillion by leveraging a good idea in an entrepreneurial way. That's the exception, not the rule. So anyway, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for that comment, Frank. I'm also from Indiana, actually. Ended up somewhere in Canada, but I'm from the region, actually. And what you're saying actually came up in another roundtable we ran, which was essentially, we're very clear to students about what they're going to learn, right, in a course, in a program. But the how of why they're learning in a certain way, and what value that delivers for them, not just in the class or in the program, but over time as they get launched out into the world. That was a topic that definitely has come up quite a bit. I'd be curious to know, are you, Frank, and other faculty kind of seen as sort of responsible at Indiana Wesleyan for kind of helping students connect the dots? Is it institutional leadership? Are you all working together?
Well, I'm a former member of the administration,
Okay.
happily teaching full time, and the pandemic did not hit us because I work in the non-traditional adult learning side of our operation. We have a fairly mature, excuse me while my phone continues to ring. We have a fairly mature asynchronous online product that we've been offering for a number of years, as has been described in this session. So that's sort of, again, we are in our context, we're ready for a lot of the challenges of the pandemic already, but I am a faculty voice with an administrator's perspective that continues to try to ask the question about how should we frame our value proposition to our student, and how can we make the student learning experiences valuable, transparent, flexible, so that the student can come to us for what they need in the moment, and perhaps we can educate them on why the next step and the next level is a valuable investment. So I'm one of many voices. I'm not a stakeholder. You call me, I can't get you into a conversation in which somebody could consider Top Hat, okay? But what I can say is that, oh yeah, I heard this presentation by the Top Hat folks. They have this wonderful document that you should read. And that might make stakeholders and budget line item managers say, maybe a conversation's warranted. But I'm not that person. I'm also vice chair for our LEAP Indiana Association, AAC&U state chapter. So events like this with organizations like this creates brand equity that comes up in conversation in my circle and state service as well. So.
Fantastic. That's really helpful context. Appreciate that, Frank. I know that we only have 1 minute left. I'll see if there's anyone else in the audience who wants to kind of venture out and say the topic they're grappling with.
There is a comment at the very end there from a I don't want to mispronounce her name, Janae Robert. And she said, as a researcher, I think one of the challenges is that investigating many of the issues, especially for historically underrepresented groups, requires the collection and analysis of qualitative data. Not all of our schools are equipped to do that at the institutional level, especially as big data has been such a focus lately. Did you want to maybe come off mute and talk a little bit more about that and why that is significant for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly we don't have much time left, so I don't want to belabor the fact, right? It's just, I'm from Penn State, so one of the Big Ten schools, you know, we're always excited about what we can do with big data, big learning analytics. You know, machine learning is growing in popularity now, and we're all excited about that. And I don't think that that's something we shouldn't be excited about, but as we focus more and more on that, we don't always have even just the personnel available. It's in our institutional research offices. I mean, I think most of us would be shocked if you went down the hall, so to speak, down the hall and asked your IR folks, do you even have a specialist in qual analysis? How many of us don't? It would be really interesting. Look at the job ads for IR. How many of them actually say they want a qualitative person? They probably don't. And so that's interesting when you think about, by definition, underrepresented groups, right? We don't necessarily capture that in our big data. So that's something to just think about.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll wrap up here, Rachel. Appreciate that perspective, Janae. And you know, there are many ways to be able to collect that. I think the aggregation and the analysis is sometimes the most challenging part, to your point, especially if you don't have the expertise to do that. But you know, Penn State is reaping the benefits from Top Hat, I think, and I would love to chat with you further about this particular issue, because I think at least on the collection, there's an opportunity for Top Hat to help. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all for making time. It's been an honor to chat with all of you today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. This is my contact information, or feel free to stop by the Top Hat virtual booth, and we'd love to continue the dialogue.
And I'd just like to say to everybody, I grabbed the document that had been assembled on the topic. It looks very rich. I intend to read that and use that. And thank you for making that downloadable PDF available. That was very easy to get access to. Thank you for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Frank. Appreciate that. And thank you all. Have a good afternoon.